friends, can darkness put out the light? Can darkness extinguish light? I think you will answer by saying, no, darkness is not capable of extinguishing light. Light extinguishes darkness, but darkness does not extinguish light. Darkness results from the absence of something. It results from the absence of light. But light does not result from the absence of something. It doesn't result from the absence of darkness. Light is a positive thing. And when it's present, the darkness disappears. Just imagine if you were in a very large room and the room was totally dark. And you were standing in the middle of the room and you decided to light a match. Now that little match would light up and you would see the brightness of that little light. And all the darkness of that room is not capable of putting out that little light. That little light can hold its own in the presence of great darkness. And I think there's a great lesson here for all of us. And that is, darkness is not capable of crushing the light. And that is why if we want to get rid of darkness in our lives, the way to do it is to bring in the light. And of course, we're told in Scripture that Christ is the light. If we invite Christ in, if we bring him in, he will help us get rid of the darkness. He will take away the darkness. But if we try to take away darkness through our own efforts, it's not going to work. Take, for example, the darkness of sin. We might have some very sinful habits in our lives. And if we have the idea that we must get rid of our sinful habits first before we invite Jesus in, it's not going to work. Because the truth is, we're not capable of getting rid of our sinful habits by our own efforts. We need to invite Jesus in right away. And only with the presence of Jesus in our lives is it possible for our sinful habits to lose their power. And another thing we learn from the Christian message is that if we're looking for the light, we will find it in the darkness. Now, most people wouldn't understand that. But that is a very important truth that comes through the Christian message. And it's a truth that Jesus came to tell us. If you're going through a darkness in your life, if you're going through great pain, a crisis, maybe it's the death of a loved one. Maybe it's a loved one who is very, very ill. Maybe it's a child in trouble. Maybe it's the loss of a job. Maybe it's just depression. But if you're going through a darkness in your life and you're looking for some light, the Christian message is telling all of us that the light is to be found in the darkness. That the solution to your problem is to be found in the problem. But we live in a world that doesn't believe this. We live in a society that doesn't believe this. Our world tells us, well, the way to get rid of darkness is to run from it, to escape it. And of course, they'll give us all kinds of ways to escape. They'll offer us stimulants, alcohol, drugs, or they'll tell us to just move to another area and get away from the problem. But you see, Jesus is different. His message is different. He's telling us that the answer is to be found in the problem. If we stay with the problem, if we confront the problem, if we shoulder the problem, we'll discover the answer right there in the problem. The light is in the darkness. It's not something that's separate from the darkness. And that's the Christian message. In the Gospel of today's Mass, we read about an extraordinary event in the life of Jesus. He goes up on the mountainside and he brings with him the three disciples, Peter, James, and John. And something very, very amazing happens to him. We're told that he is transfigured before their eyes. And the apostles were looking at him, and they could see his face become so very white, and his clothes became dazzlingly bright. And then a voice was heard from the heavens. It was the voice of his Father. And the voice said, "This is my beloved Son, on whom my favor rests. Listen to him." And then Moses and Elijah appeared in a vision, talking to him. It was an extraordinary event, and the apostles were overcome with fear. It was overwhelming, and Jesus tried to reassure them and tell them that it was all right, not to worry. And then Peter was filled with excitement. He realized it was an extraordinary moment, and he wanted to commemorate it by building 3 tents. But Jesus said otherwise. He invited them to go down the mountain. But what this whole experience and happening is telling us that in the midst of all the darkness that Jesus was dealing with in his struggle on this earth, every day he was confronting opposition. He was meeting opposition. People were opposing him. People were criticizing him. People were even saying that he came from the devil. He was meeting lots of opposition, and all around him he could see the darkness of sin. And he knew that one day he would have to go forward to Jerusalem, and he was going to be arrested and scourged and crucified and put to death. So he was dealing with a lot of darkness. And he told the apostles that he would have to face Jerusalem. And they didn't want to hear it. But then in the midst of all this extraordinary event happens. An experience of glory, God's glory breaking through, letting Jesus know that he was with him, and letting the apostles know that God was with them. And you see, the lesson here is that no amount of darkness can crush the light. The light may remain secret and dormant. We may not notice it, but the light is there. The light is in the midst of the darkness. And that is why Jesus went forward to Jerusalem, and he faced the cross, as difficult as it would be for him. He faced it. He didn't run from it. He carried it. He died on it. And then something extraordinary happened. After his death came that glorious resurrection. You see, he went through the pain. He went through the darkness. And out of that darkness and pain came that extraordinary light, the resurrection. So what today's gospel is telling us is that that magnificent light is there for all of us to embrace. And we'll come to know it if we too will stay with the cross in our lives. Because all of us, we all meet the cross. Nobody escapes the cross. It comes to us in various ways. And especially those of us who are older and who have experienced more of life. We've experienced the cross. In many ways, it could be death, it could be the loss of a job, but there are so many ways we meet the cross, and we don't like it. And of course, the temptation is to try to run from it. The temptation is to try to numb it by taking drugs and trying to convince ourselves the cross isn't there. But what the Christian message, what Lent is telling us, is to meet the cross. Whatever cross is before you today, face it, meet it. Don't try to run from it. And then you will discover that in that cross is the solution. And you see, what the Christian message is telling us is that we should trust the darkness in our lives. We should trust the suffering. We should trust the pain. That deep in that darkness, the light of Christ exists. Deep in that pain is the solution to the pain. And it's a beautiful message. It's a very consoling message. But it's a message that the world doesn't listen to. And it's a message the world doesn't teach or preach. It teaches the opposite. And that's why so many people go into deeper pain, because they keep running from their pain. They don't see the beauty of the cross. It has been said that a person who runs from the agony will never taste the ecstasy. And that is so true. If we have the courage to stay with the agony in our lives, whenever the agony comes, if we have the courage just to stay with it, the ecstasy will arrive. You see, when we run from the agony in our lives, somehow we lose Jesus, because Jesus doesn't run from the agony. He never runs from darkness. He never runs from agony. He stays right there with it. And he invites us to stay with it, even though at times he knows we're going to weaken and maybe want to run, but he keeps inviting us back. And if we try to stay with the agony, if we try to stay with the problem, the pain, then Jesus is right there with us, because that's what he did with his agony. He stayed with it. And then he came to know the ecstasy. So as we learn to stay with the pain, stay with the agony, then we come to know the ecstasy. We think of that day when Jesus died, Good Friday, that terrible day, when he was murdered. And yet we call that day good. We don't call it bad, because we know that so much good came from what seemed to be so bad. And you see, we can learn from that we in our lives, we experience the Good Fridays. We have those moments when things are not going well. Those moments when pain enters, crisis enters, Good Friday enters. We don't like those days. But you see, Jesus is saying to us, stay with your Good Friday. Just stay with it and trust it. Just think of the Good Friday that Jesus went through and the good that came out of that terrible event. And just keep that in mind. There's goodness in the darkness. There's light in the darkness. And as we stay with our Good Friday, Jesus stays with us. And we're brought through to a glorious Easter Sunday, a glorious resurrection. We're brought through to a glorious Transfiguration.